this. I don't know if I will. Yeah, so like I said, the first debate will be about whether we should open the borders in this country. The second debate will be whether we should give paid parental leave to workers in this country. And once again, I believe this is an adjustment to the labor market, because what happens there? It actually makes certain workers a little bit more expensive to hire, because the actual because it's paid leave, not unpaid. It means you have to give people basically a higher compensation on average per hour that they work. Of course, you're only giving it to people who happen to have children, but let's say, on average, a certain fraction of your workers may have children and apply for this parental leave. You have to pay them for it, and it may actually be sort of an adjustment in the cost of hiring people. Right? It's kind of small, but it's there. And then the third debate is minimum wage. And this one is probably the most obvious impact on the labor market. The minimum wage is a minimum wage. It is a floor on the equilibrium wage that can emerge in a market. In fact, if for some reason the market wages are below the minimum wage, then minimum wage causes you to be out of equilibrium. It says what would normally be the equilibrium wage is not going to occur. It's illegal to pay someone that wage. And what will happen there, as the wage, if the minimum wage is above the equilibrium wage, we'll see this today. I want to have a lecture about it. And that is the labor supply will be larger than the labor demand, right? I mean, if you can picture in your mind the graph, I'm picturing, that would make sense. But we'll talk about that. And that minimum wage could possibly distort the market in such a way that there's forced unemployment. There's people who would like to find a job at a certain wage but can't. Okay. So I feel like we need. Last lecture, we talked about mostly labor demand, where it comes from, but I don't think we finished it. It was like we still hadn't gotten to tie it all together, what labor demand comes from. Let's do that. Finish talking about labor supply, putting them together, and then what happens when there's these distortions to the market. And the distortions are open borders, shifting labor supply to the right, parental leave, shifting labor demand a little bit down, I would say, because at a given wage, however much you had to pay for them, you have to pay. I feel like it's a shift down, because the actual dollars per hour that you pay, when it was previously this many dollars per hour, it's just it's more. So it's hard to explain, but I feel like it's a shift. Did I say shift down? Because sorry, it should be a shift up. Wait, we will figure this out. So at a particular wage, let's say $20 per hour. If you were willing to hire 100 units of labor at $20 per hour, now if I have to give them a little bit more, let's say it's for demonstrative purposes, it's an extra $1 per hour, and I want to know, okay, what's my labor demand at that that it's equivalent to this previous point. It'll be whatever I demanded at $19 per hour, because that I have to pay them an extra $1. So you do have to shift the curve such that I think it was the quantity demanded at 19 is now what is demanded at 20. I'll draw this sometime today. and it'll make more sense. And then the minimum wage is a floor, so it actually may or may not affect the equilibrium price. If the equilibrium is already above the minimum wage, then the theory says it actually shouldn't affect anything. Whereas if the minimum wage is above the equilibrium wage, then it has a big effect. So let's just try to, I feel like today's lecture is just trying to catch up on all of these issues of the labor market so that we can talk about the distortions of the labor market that will actually be the next 3 debates we have. On my slides is not too much here that we haven't already done. So let's talk about a review of this marginal revenue product of labor. Some books and instructors will leave off the word revenue, and if you just see marginal product of labor, oftentimes that's what they really mean is marginal revenue product of labor, especially if it's denoted in dollars. That's what it is referring to. And the thing to remember is that units of labor, first, the number of workers hired, and a profit maximizing firm will never want to offer a worker wage above their marginal revenue product. So wage, whatever the wage is, it has to be less than or equal to the marginal revenue product of a worker. Take any one particular worker. I think we did talk about this last class. Various occupations, of course, have different marginal revenue products. Even various countries. There's a Marginal Revolution University video that I like that talks about India and the United States, and their example is janitors. And the question is, why do janitors in the United States make more money than janitors in India? What's happening here, is that people are somehow different in the way they perform janitorial duties in the two countries? The answer, of course, is not. It is an economic issue. It has to do with exactly how valuable are those janitorial services in terms of bringing in more revenue to the businesses that they are working in. So his example, I'm debating whether to show you this video. I mean, if there's time, I like the video because it also has kind of neat graphs and things, it has examples too that I enjoyed watching and might want to share with you. But it really comes down to this marginal revenue. I don't want to give away everything from the have you watch a video. Yeah, so I will show you some of it. So I'm going to hold on to this, how it applies across various countries. It's still informative about what is behind a labor market. Look at spreadsheet examples. I did make my own sort of spreadsheet examples of, all right, I will show you my work on my, hey, where's my Google Sheet? This one. Oh, there, okay. Oh, sorry, somebody's waiting. Hopefully you're all admitted now. Anybody who wants to get in the room, the Zoom room. Let's make sure. Okay, so what are you seeing now? This is a Google Sheet where I have calculated the labor supply curve for a firm that has a very simple production function. Well, it has a square root. Except for the square root, I would say it's very simple. And that is the amount of output of this firm. So imagine a firm that produces something. And the number of things that it produces is equal to the square root of the number, the units of capital times the units of labor. So I take, however many units of capital I have, that's capital K. However many units of labor I have, that's capital L. Multiply those together and take the square root. And that's how many units of output this firm has. If that's true, then let's talk about, well, what is the value of each unit of labor? What is the value of each unit of labor? Well, each unit of labor increases this KL and increases square root KL, so it increases your output. And in fact, that is what's defined as the marginal product of labor. I don't know if I'm losing you guys here with this spreadsheet, but what I've done here is just say, let's assume capital right now is equal to 1. This is a firm with exactly 1 unit of capital. And now let's let labor be any number, be zero, starting at 0 and going up in integers. And remember, capital is fixed at 1. If labor is 0, what kind of output will it be? The square root of 1 times 0 is 0. So it produces nothing if it has no labor. If it gets 1 unit of labor, then it's the square root of 1 times 1, that's 1. In other words, that first unit of labor had a marginal product of 1. Instead of producing 0, it caused this firm to produce 1. Okay, how about the second guy? Well, now you have the square root of 1 times 2. That's this number, which is the square root of 2. If you know the square root of 2, it's 1.414, dot, dot, dot. And therefore, the marginal product of that second guy is lower than its first. You guys kind of see that? It's not that, somehow the first guy is a good worker and the second guy is a bad worker. That's not it at all. In fact, you could have replaced, worker A and worker B. If you hired them in the opposite order, these marginal products of labor would still be the same. It's really about, for both of the workers, right? For both of those second workers, let's say you hire 2 workers. For both of them, their marginal product of labor, meaning how much extra do they bring to you if you had them as opposed to not having them, is this 0.414, because that's the square root of 2 minus 1. And I've done this for every number L here as you go up. As you see, the marginal product of labor goes down. It's kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen idea here, right? Once you get like 10 units of labor, 11, 12, 13, you may have a lot of guys in a very small room, not very small room, but the size of your factory hasn't changed. You just keep adding more people to the factory and seeing how it affects the output. Of course, this marginal product of labor is going to go down. But, okay, that's not the whole story. I also wanted to factor in this fact that it doesn't just matter how much you produce, it matters what you can sell it for. So I created a demand curve. This is a downward sloping demand curve. And using this, I can calculate the revenue of this firm. It's not just your quantity, it's your quantity times the price. And this is an inverse demand curve is how you can calculate the price. Price times quantity is revenue. So I've done that here. And this is the real value to the firm. The real value of a worker to a firm is that you've increased my output and I'm able to sell that output for this much revenue. So this final column here, it's column G, is the marginal revenue product of each worker. And what I'm arguing is that is the way that labor supply is determined. It's determined by this final column G. That for this worker, he's like bringing in $19 worth of revenue to the firm. Or maybe this is millions of dollars, I don't know, thousands, let's say thousands. This is, this first worker is bringing in $19,000 to the firm. If you only had one worker, that's how much you'd be willing. That actually seems low, doesn't it? Well, I don't know if who knows what the units are, doesn't matter. And then the second worker is bringing in less on the margin. Third, even less, fourth, fifth, sixth. Each person that you hire is bringing in less and less revenue to the firm on the margin. But this is a plot of that. And you can kind of see this already has this normal looking downward sloping supply curve, labor supply curve shape. It only comes from this production function and this demand. That's the only things I assumed. I assumed that the production function looks like this. And I assumed that the demand curve looks like this. And just those two assumptions were enough for me to derive what the labor supply curve looks like for this firm. It also, because it's a spreadsheet, allows me to change the capital. So right now, capital is 1. What do you think will happen if the capital of this firm goes to 2? So imagine capital is, 1 stands for $1 million, a $1 million factory. If instead of a $1 million factory, you had a $2 million factory, how would that change your supply curve? What do you think? Would it go up or down? It's hard to say, isn't it? I'm going to double the capital of this firm.
If you double the capital, won't it make hiring more workers more efficient because they have more tools to use?
The intuition is great. efficiency is, it's weird to be thinking about efficiency. If by that you mean lowest average cost, is that maybe what you meant?
Well, you were talking about too many cooks in the kitchen. Well, by that
Yes.
definition, you would then expand the kitchen. So you
Yeah.
cook.
If you have more kitchens, then you can hire more cooks. So yeah, Philip's intuition is correct. It was, I shouldn't get like focused in on one word. You used the word efficiency, and I wasn't sure it was exactly the right concept for this. But other than that, you were perfectly correct. Let's see what happens to the labor supply curve if I change capital from 1 to 2. Actually, it's going to be not very satisfying. It went up, but because yeah, I knew this was going to happen. It went up, but because the axes adjusted with it, you can't really tell. But you can see now the highest axis is 30. If I go up again, and still can't tell very well, but the axis here, the label is now 40. There you can tell it went up because the axis didn't change. There you can tell it went up again. The capital is now 5. This is like I'm increasing the capital of the firm. That's all I've done. The demand for the product is exactly the same. I'm not touching how badly people want this product. I'm just altering the firm's capabilities of producing it, and that increases the labor supply curve. That's something to think about when we have a discussion about immigration. Which country has more capital, United States or Mexico? It's not, that's not a trick question. The answer is United States. In fact, we are the richest country in the world in terms of overall GDP. Not GDP per capita, but GDP. Sorry, what am I saying? That doesn't directly imply that we have a higher capital stock than other countries. I don't want you to think that I think that. Does this model capture decreasing rooms from capital? Of course it does, Nick. Good question. Do you know why it does? It's built into this function here. If I were to let capital go up I haven't drawn MPK, which is the marginal product of capital, but it would have exactly the same feature to it where it'd be decreasing. And labor is something that you hire. You hire labor, and there's more labor that's out there for you to hire them. That goes into your decision of whether or not to hire this person is the market for this, the market for labor. But for what about for capital? The decision to increase capital is really about how much are you willing to invest in this firm, and how much are other people willing to invest in this firm? If you have a business and it's like, oh, hey, this is a great idea, there should be people out there willing to invest in you, right? You should be able to go to a bank and say, hey, I have an idea. I'm going to produce this. I don't have the money for it, but I want a loan. And one good thing about capitalism is that, remember, the invisible hand, the notion of the invisible hand is that it will guide resources, including dollars, including capital investments, into those industries where they could have the highest return. Therefore, this is basically encapsulating the marginal product of capital, is that if I were to invest another $1 million into this firm, how much more revenue would it generate? Well, if the answer is a lot, then there should be somebody out there, a bank, who's willing to loan you that money so that you can invest in your company, so that you can make that extra money. And the bank will get the interest on that loan, but marginal product of capital matters too. I'm not analyzing it in this particular spreadsheet, but it is there, and it is diminishing. And the reason it's diminishing is because in this function here, if you took the derivative of this function with respect to k, it's actually a partial derivative, because k and l are both variables. If you took the partial derivative with respect to k, you would see that number is decreasing in k. But let's not do that. If you're taking my other class right now, which is Econ 403, Math Econ, then we would be doing exactly this, taking partial derivatives of functions and maybe even optimizing with respect to two choice variables, k and l. That's something I will have my students do in that class. But that's a math class. This is an issues class. Here's my point. This is part of the difference between the United States and India, isn't it? Or the United States and Mexico. We have more capital. Certainly, there's more wealth in this country, and there's more investment. Banks that are, you go to a bank and say, "Hey, can I?" Oh gosh, I'm being a little misleading here because I don't really mean to say that somebody in Mexico can't get a loan. That there isn't also a capital market for firms in Mexico. In fact, I don't believe that's true. I actually think it's about the return to a capital investment in this country is higher, right? That in general, that's why we see firms with more capital investment in this country than say Mexico. But this changing graph does show at least a little bit that that's an effect on the labor supply. I wrote labor supply. That's wrong. Why did I write that? This is just wrong. I'm sorry, guys. I'm mostly embarrassed that if I put this video on YouTube, it's going to have like 20 minutes of me talking about this as if it's labor supply instead of labor demand. Did I using words, did I say labor supply or did I say labor demand? I don't even know. I don't want to go back and look because it's just too embarrassing. This is labor demand, not labor supply. Oops. Do you guys see why it's labor demand? It's the firm that's demanding workers to come work for it. And what are these dots here? These dots are the column G. This is column G being plotted. And on the y-axis is column G. On the x-axis is just the number of workers. That's column C. But it says exactly how much I would be willing to pay on the margin for that number of workers. And it just comes from this number is how much more money do they bring in? Well, this worker brings in this much money, so I'm willing to pay at most that much. This worker brings in this much money, I'm willing to pay at most that much, and etc. all the way down the line. Now let's think about the whole labor market, not just one firm, but the whole market. It would actually be not this one firm's demand, but all firms' demand summed up horizontally. And it's kind of interesting when if you have this as curved like this, pretty much a lot of that curvature goes away when you sum things up horizontally. Because let's say the point at which there's this curve and it kinks out this way, that could be different for different firms. And in aggregate, it does tend to be maybe a little bit more smoother of a line, is what I'm saying. Okay, but that is where aggregate labor demand comes from. It just comes from this basic assumption is that there's a firm out there that wants to make as much money as it can. It has a certain demand for its products, and you can calculate exactly how much money each person brings in, and I'm willing to pay them at most that much. Okay. I don't know why I said labor supply there. I even wrote it up here wrong. This should have said demand. Okay. What's the next thing I want to show you guys? Let's go to my labor markets PowerPoint. That was the spreadsheet examples why I say look at the spreadsheet examples. Hello. Okay, here we go. Supply of labor. Supply of labor, of course, comes from workers and their willingness to work. Did I talk about this last class? Workers have an outside option that's worth XI to them. Workers paid more than that, you'll take that. Of course, this is basically just, there's no math going on here. This is just a way to describe the fact that people will accept a job if it's better than anything else they could be doing with their time. But once again, you could graph that. You could graph, just like how I derived the labor demand, you could derive the labor supply, where one axis is the hours that you would work, or the number of workers, and the other is wage. And it has this, of course, it has this increasing feature to it. Better. It wouldn't make any sense if it didn't. I'll just do a whiteboard here, right? Oh, it's red. Okay, it's going to be red. If this is wage and this is quantity supplied of labor, it's got to have this increasing the thing to it. Even if you're the type of person who says, well, you know what, after I get to a certain amount of money, I can actually work less. And that's probably all of us. If somebody says, hey, I'll pay you $1,000 an hour to do something, for the rest of your life, you're going to get this wage of $1,000 per hour. We wouldn't be like, oh gosh, I got to work 80 hours a week all the time. And you spend all your life working and working and working. But you wouldn't get to enjoy the stuff. You wouldn't get to enjoy all that money that you made. So an individual's labor supply curve doesn't look like this. It would come to some point where they're like, yeah, that's it. I don't want to do any more labor. I'll do this with like a different color, like, this maroon color. There's a guy who's like that. I don't want to work anymore. There's another guy who's like that and like that. But because they all have this property where, different people have different wages that they, so let's talk about the janitorial market. If this is the market for janitors, there's some people who are like totally fine with being a janitor and they would be willing to accept this wage down here. What happens as the wage goes up? It's not that janitors are willing to spend more time being janitors. They've already spent as much time as they can being a janitor. It's that some people who were formerly waiters at a restaurant, or working any other job that didn't pay particularly well. Once the wage, like let's say this is $20 per hour, maybe I should go even higher, like $30 per hour. There's going to be people who switch occupations to come join this market, and that's why it's a fair assumption to say that the supply curve is positive sloped. So I showed you labor supply. Sorry, I don't even know why I'm bothering to write that. It's just so sloppy. But labor supply is positive slope. Labor demand is negatively sloped. That's because of the graph that I showed you before. And when you put those two together, you get an intersection point. That's the equilibrium wage. Sorry. But by the way, it's called a competitive. If it's truly a competitive market, that means anyone can enter or exit the market, and no one firm has a lot of power to control the market. Then it's called a competitive market, and therefore it's a competitive equilibrium when the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. That's when we have a competitive equilibrium. I gave this mathematical example here, which I'm now debating whether I want to actually go through with you. I actually think the video does a better job on this. I don't know if you guys think if I spend some time showing you a video from Marginal Revenue University, if that's better than trying to work this out, because I'm not in front of you right now. It makes it a little bit harder to, like, here's my answer. You can see on the next slide. I have all these sort of like intervals of the wages, and then from there you can actually calculate the answer. The answer is $6. So like, here's a question. It tells you what the demand for workers is. It tells you what the supply for workers is, and it asks what's the competitive equilibrium wage. I don't think I'm going to ask you to do a mathematical example like this. I want you to be familiar with the concepts of labor supply, labor demand, and that they come together to form an equilibrium wage. But I think I'm not going to have you actually do the math to calculate it. So what do you guys think? If you don't mind, I have it here somewhere. Marginal product of labor. Oh, by the way, this video doesn't call it marginal revenue product. They shorten it. They just call it marginal product. So I guess maybe that happens more than I realize. Let me share. Oh, I'm not sharing the right thing. Here we go. Share this. How well can you hear this if I play?
What makes the demand for labor different than the demand for apples?
Can you hear it?
Yeah,
What
I
do you,
can hear it.
he said, what makes the demand for labor different than the demand for? I'm testing you to see if you heard him. Listen again.
I'm going to begin in this part of the lecture with the determination of wages. What makes the demand for labor different than the demand for apples is that the demand.
Did you hear it?
Yeah, demand for apples.
Okay, you can't hear it. It's funny. I don't trust you. I have to prove that you understand.
Paying attention that first time. I could just hear it.
Yeah. Well, Nick says it's kind of spotty, so I don't think I should rely too much on you hearing what he said, but I can still show you some of the graphs and things, the main points, if that's okay. So let's continue.
Labor is a derived demand. Firms hire workers because the workers increase their revenues. The idea behind the demand for labor is the market.
Oh, we've already said this stuff.
If the curve goes so forth. As long as the wage.
I mean, these 3 points are exactly what I was just talking about for 10 minutes. So I'm going to skip ahead, right? Wage less than marginal product of labor. He means marginal revenue product because we're talking about the dollars that you could earn, but same thing. That's what he means.
Less than the marginal product, like McDonald's.
I kind of like this example of, you know, what would a business like McDonald's actually do if they were hiring janitors? If they just hired one janitor, what would you have them do? You'd have them do this. And what is the marginal product of labor? Their marginal revenue product of labor. This is like how many more customers would be willing to come into your store having clean restrooms as opposed to not having clean restrooms. It actually might make a really big deal, right? Having that one janitor is a huge deal for McDonald's. If you're open 10 hours, I don't know, you probably open more than 10 hours per day, but let's say you're open 10 hours per day, that's bringing you an extra $350 into your store because your restrooms are clean instead of smelly and people walk in the door like, oh, this place stinks, and they leave immediately. And then if you hire 2 janitors, the second one does a different task, but it's still a very valuable one, emptying the trash. If you have 3 janitors, you can clean it more often, etc. I just like this idea that this kind of shows, before I gave you this graph of the diminishing marginal product of labor, but I didn't really explain what is it that these people are doing that's less and less valuable. You know, by the time you hire 8 janitors, he's only removing the gum from the bottom of the tables. Yeah, that's something people care about a little bit, but not maybe that much. So that's where this diminishing MPL comes from.
Think about the second point. The firm will want off janitors is derivation. Demand for labor.
And then he draws it here. So this demand curve, he correctly called it a demand curve, unlike me, accidentally called it a supply curve. This diminishing number comes from just this, about how valuable each of these janitorial tasks are, you know, and the fact that, you know, how much more revenue would the McDonald's get if they, you know, more people are willing to come to the store and buy their food if these things have been done. And so I like how that's where that comes from. You can see that diminishing
that if the
demand curve.
Greater than $35 an hour, the firm would demand no janitors. That's because the very first janitor adds $35 an hour to the firm's revenues. If the wage is higher than that, that janitor is not worth hiring. As the wage falls, however, more and more janitors become worthwhile to hire. If the market wage were $10, 7 janitors would be hired. I
like this. He's starting to look ahead to what the market could be like. And remember, in a competitive market, one firm has no control over the wage. It's like you're a price taker. You're a price taker in a competitive market. You don't get to control the price. Whatever it is, it's $10, take it or leave it. So in this example, if the market wage were $10, this graph sort of tells you how many janitors you'd hire. You'd hire 7. It actually seems like a lot to me if it's just one McDonald's, but I don't know. maybe it's a series of McDonald's. I can't really say.
Hired. The demand for janitors.
However, if the market range were only 30, you would hire only one. So that's where you kind of get this downward slope. And it's just because they're all, at each point, they're thinking, what makes me the most money? Is it worth it for me to hire these people? Okay, I am belaboring this point, get it?
A single firm. Now consider summing up the quantity of janitors demanded at each wage for all the firms in the market.
Oh, it's too
That's
fast.
how we get to the market demand for janitors. So let's go to the market demand. Curve derived from the marginal product of labor and a supply curve. The supply curve says that as the wage increases, the quantity of janitors supplied will also increase. That's intuitive, but I want to say a little bit more about the supply curve in a moment because there's one possible complication.
He's going to talk about people with the backward bending supply curve. But I already say that even if one person says, "Oh, I've worked enough, I don't need to work anymore," it's still the market supply curve will still be positive sloping and expanding because people who will enter the market who previously were outside of it. No time for this. He's going to talk about
working so many more hours. If you answer demand and supply, give yourself half points. Let's go a bit deeper. The demand for janitors is higher in the United States because the United States is a more productive economy. There's more and better capital to work with. The office workers are more productive. The American office produces a more valuable product. The result is that it's more valuable to keep a U.S. office building. That's one of the reasons why American janitors earn more. The demand for their services is higher. This is a useful reminder. You may have a number of valuable skills. Perhaps you're able to program a computer or write a report or motivate sales staff and so forth. But your skills only have value within a given context. If you were transplanted to a different economy, your skills might be worth less. Maybe because your skills would be less useful, but also because other people might not have the money to pay for your skills.
Brian Kaplan makes this point all the time when talking about open borders. He supports open borders, and he says he's often debating in front of a group of people. And he says, if you sir, had to move right now to Haiti and you were trapped there, you were not allowed to leave, and you just had to use whatever skills you had to try to earn a living there in Haiti, you would be in a lot of trouble. And there's this idea that that the value of your labor is hugely determined by where you happen to live and what businesses are around you that could possibly hire you. Or even if you're an entrepreneur, even if you start your own business, good for you, but you still are relying on this infrastructure around you and markets around you to buy your products and services. And that there is just these enormous differences across countries. Here, he's picked India and the United States to say, why do janitors earn so much more in the US than they do in India? And he's given you all these reasons, but you don't have to go very far from this country. Haiti is not that far away, and their economy is very poor right now. And I think the wages is 20 times higher here for unskilled worker in the United States than in Haiti. You take this exact same person, move them from Haiti to the United States, and their wage jumps up by a factor of 2,000% increase. Some people have this idea, well, that's just their fault. They're not very smart. They're not very skilled. And, those Haitians, they're just not as good workers as Americans. That's so naive to think that, right? Because you take anybody, and if you're trapped in Haiti, you can't get a visa out. You'd have to live there. Your marginal product of labor would go way down. I mean, I know mine would. I mean, I teach economics at a university, and there's not any universities in Haiti that would be hiring economists at anywhere near the salary I'm currently making. So I mean, I'm saying this about myself too, that I'm incredibly lucky to live in the United States that has this demand for labor, and that it really is a demand and supply in combination affecting how much people earn. And gosh, we're running out of time. Maybe now is a good time to go to India has more workers. I don't know if there's any other points I need. Oh, here's a graph. This graph, next one, shows you a little bit of the difference in wages. I think this is a good starting point. Can I actually go full screen here? Can I annotate? I think I can. Gaming the system. Okay, so we want to have a debate on Thursday about opening borders. And India is a country that has over 1 billion people, and actually a lot of them speak English in India. A lot of people from India could come to this country and get jobs. They could get like desk jobs, you know, they could be working in a lot of industries in this country if they were allowed to. As it turns out, right now you need a visa, and there's only so many visas they give out. So we have essentially a closed border for labor. But if we open it, what's going to happen? Do you mind if I have some discussion here? I wonder if anybody's willing to give me your thoughts on what we have on the screen right now. Is, let's say that's the starting point for a closed economy, where the demand and supply in the US is up here. Workers these are janitors, by the way. Right now we're talking about janitors. Their wage is $10 per hour in the US. They're getting this much. In the India, there's a different demand, a different supply, and they intersect here, and that's at a wage of $1. And by the way, these are adjusted for, I think these are adjusted for purchasing power across the countries. I would be surprised if they weren't. But you know, so like in real terms, the wage is 10 times higher in the US than it is in India for being a janitor. My question to you, and any answer, I'm interested in what you say. What happens if we open up borders, and anyone from India could come to the US, including janitors? What do you think would happen? What's your prediction?
I think it would increase the labor supply.
Which one?
The labor supply if you're saying in this specific scenario for
There's two labor supplies. There's US here, and there's
increase the US labor supply. That's what I'm saying.
Raise it like up?
Yes, it would shift it.
Shift it up?
Yes.
Because remember, the y-axis is wage.
Sorry,
So
supply would shift to the right, like the number of workers would increase.
Shift to the right. That's right. Because quantity, this is a lesson for everybody. I think, Philip, you had it right, actually. But the first thing you said was to shift up, and I think that's wrong.
An increase in the labor supply, so it would shift to the right.
Shift to the right is the best way to describe it, because at a given wage, you know, it would shift to the right a lot, wouldn't it? Well, in particular, it's still not going to be easy to move from India to the US. Takes a lot of money to buy an airplane ticket, and you got to have somewhere to live when you get here. It's not that easy. Not like everyone from India is going to move to the US, but you could imagine a lot of them moving. Maybe I can even keep the green. And I agree with Philip. It's going to be a shift. Let's see.
I guess the most it could shift is down to minimum wage.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, well, sure. We'll think about it. Let's draw this. I actually think it might be like this, right? Well, who knows? Oh, by the way, right now the minimum wage is $7.25, except for certain localities. But let's just say right now this is above the minimum wage. Yeah. What this is a shift. I also flattened the slope a little bit, which I think is reasonable, because I think the higher the wage, the more attractive switching to this job would be, right? That's why I made this slope even flatter. I agree. I think that would happen. And what about the demand? Would the demand change for janitors in this country? This is what we were talking about earlier. I think the answer is yes, a little bit, right? There would be a little bit more demand for products because more people live in this country. But I think it's fair to say that the net effect would be there's this new equilibrium. Let's use black for that. It'd be nice if I could do dashed, but I can't. Not that I know of. It's very possible that this lowers the equilibrium, the domestic equilibrium wage for janitors goes down from $10 to $9. Isn't that that was supposed to be right there? That's $9. You can see that happening just by the shifting of people who formerly were living in India coming here, being willing to work at this wage, and that shifts the curve to the right, and you get this depressing wage. Of course, there should be some effect in India too. The supply of workers in India would go down. It would actually probably increase the wage, the local wages of Indian janitors, but it would depress this. So a lot of people who are against open borders use this as a reason not to. They say, hey, you're going to hurt the wages of domestic janitors if this happens. And I would say, okay, fine, that's true. But what can we think of any other sort of benefits from this other than what's just written here on the graphs? What will happen to firms in this country who end up paying a lower wage for the workers?
I mean,
Oh, by the way, what happens?
Can be spent somewhere else.
Sorry, they would what? Somewhere else?
Savings can be spent somewhere else.
Savings could be sent somewhere else. What about quantity produced?
They could increase quantity.
It would increase. It's kind of weird to think about janitors as producing like they're producing a service. But in our minds, we shouldn't think of just janitors, but we should think of anyone that's helping to produce things. What about people who pick fruit or work in a meat packing? Sorry, I don't know why I'm thinking of this. These are types of jobs that oftentimes Americans don't want to do. If there are a bunch of workers who are willing to do that, you could imagine it being more, the quantity increasing of these things, production would go up, and also the prices at which they could sell these goods and services could go down. This is one thing that we don't really observe very much with this option of open borders, is that once the cost of labor goes down because of the influx of workers into this country, the cost of producing things goes down. If there's a competitive market for goods and services, you would expect the prices to go down as well. And all consumers would benefit from that. Anytime you have a cheaper like refrigerator or a cheaper lawnmower, a cheaper car, a cheaper food, that actually means you have more money to spend on something else. And therefore, our consumption can grow just by having the prices be lowered. And it's a sort of hidden benefit of globalization and of this open borders that we hardly ever speak about. But one thing maybe just to think about is that you could always look at what happens to production. You may have some issues like, wait, who's actually benefiting from this? Or is this rich people getting richer? Those are legitimate questions. But if you think about how much is being produced in your country, and if you can increase the production of your country, that's usually a good indicator of the welfare of the people in the country going up. If you produce more goods and services, there's got to be somebody out there who consumes those goods and services. And a lot of times economics gets simplified into this goal of maximizing the utility from consumption. Yes, we are guilty of that. Sort of saying somebody's only as happy as all of the goods and services that they can consume. We should include leisure into that too. Leisure is a consumption good in some sense, where you don't have to work as hard or as often. That makes your life better. Anyways, there's a sort of limited amount of things I could say based just on this graph, but I did want you to have this idea that I could have done it over here too, and said the Indian supply curve shifts back this way, and maybe their demand shifts a, it should have been blue, but yeah, if we wanted to fully talk about the effects of this opening of the borders, the simplest way to put it is that the wages have pressure to equalize, don't they? Whatever the new wage is here in India, it has gone up a little bit. Maybe that's $2. And when you open borders, the wages of the poorer countries should actually increase to some degree, at least for this particular industry that they have in common. And then these guys would come down. Sounds like I'm arguing against open borders right now. If you're a local janitor, it would be bad. I should say something on the other side of that. Does anybody have something to say on the other side of, wait a second, this is bad? I almost want to show you this elephant curve. Do I have time to show you an elephant curve? Has anybody heard of the elephant curve? How come I can't get out of this? Get out. I think I can show it to you pretty quickly. Let me see. Where is it? I thought I had it up. Yes, I had it up for you right here. Here's the elephant curve. I think this guy can explain it to you pretty quick. Maybe not. Quickly. It's about who's benefiting.
Mexico and Canada. Twice. Plus, the side of France and both to the developed, the story gets less rosy.
I got to go back a little bit.
Corn.
Nope, too far.
That number is the segment going to the country.
All right. I guess I don't. But let me just show you this graph here. It kind of looks like an elephant, doesn't it? It comes up. Here's the elephant's head. It comes down, and then its trunk comes up here. And this represents the gain in real household per capita income by global income level from the years 1988, 2008. It's a time when the world was globalizing. Globalization was very quick. Companies were moving overseas. Transnational corporations were being formulated, and what was happening to workers on the global scale. And actually, you can see here these workers in the middle, represented by these Lego guys. They had their incomes grow substantially, more than 50%. This is countries like Brazil, India, China, had a lot of workers who, because of foreign capital and they had their incomes grow a lot. Whereas the poor people in this country, the people who are working class in this country, are actually here on a global scale. They're actually like in the 80th percentile or 80th to 90th percentile often in terms of their actual income, what they have. So let's listen.
Less rosy. Now we're moving into the working and middle classes of developed countries like the US, Canada, and Western Europe. As you can see, many of them have seen low or even no growth in a generation's time. It doesn't go negative. So in that sense, on average, these people didn't lose money, but it's far below what was expected. This is the trunk of the elephant.
Middle-class workers in developed economies, they're not only competing more with cheaper labor abroad, but they're also competing more against their own automations in their own countries. So this too has to some extent held down wages for some classes of workers.
Does this mean these workers make less than those in China, Mexico, and Brazil? No. remember the vertical axis doesn't compare income, but rather growth in income over 20 years. So while these middle-class workers in developed countries have seen much less income growth, because they had a much higher income to begin with, they still make far more than most workers in developing countries.
Do you see that? They actually put little numbers on here. Like, here's somebody who's only making 7.4 thousand per year, and now they make 7.8 thousand per year. Well, that's still better. And remember, that's real income, so that's adjusted for inflation. They are getting better. Whereas somebody here, I think this is maybe in Mexico, their income was $900 per year, and now which was very poor, right? Very poor person. But because of more globalization, more open borders, and more, it's not just labor coming across; it's also capital from the U.S. going to Mexico. Their income went up to 1.5 thousand per year. Of course, that's a lot better for them than 900, but they're still way behind the poor, working class of this country, right? So there's this weird perspective when you think of where you are in terms of the entire world. The poor people in this country who are losing out a little bit when, Indian janitors, if they were to come to this country, they would lose a little bit of their wages. They're still way ahead of people in the developing world who are almost now fully developed. But I don't know. I thought this elephant graph was kind of a good way to show that. And then, of course, there's these people who are the people who have wealth already, people who have or are working in industries that are actually becoming more and more valuable because they can sell their product to more places. They're benefiting hugely from this. They would actually love to have more foreign workers come here because they are the ones who will benefit from that. If you work in Apple, and there's an example of, the people who work in Apple, a marketer, an engineer, or a designer in Apple, their services become even more valuable, right? Because they can sell to a huge global market. It's great for them. But if you are a manufacturer, a local manufacturer in this country, and Apple says, well, you know what, because of globalization, I'm going to build my factory somewhere else, you're hurting, right? It really doesn't benefit everybody the same way. And you can see that in this elephant graph, that, man, it would be great to be up here by the top people earning so much more, as these people here are earning so much less. It's just weird when you start to say, if you used this as an excuse to say, let's not do it at all, let's not open borders, let's not have transnational corporations, because these people down here aren't seeing very much of an income increase, while as the people to the left of them and to the right of them are. Maybe there's something else we could do for these workers, right? That's my takeaway. Rather than say we need to shut down the whole system of growth, let's think of some other way to make it more equitable. I think that's my takeaway. That's probably my last point. Let's talk about this class. What are we going to do for this class next? Now, on Thursday, we will debate this open borders. Are the two people that are doing it, are they here today? Are you guys ready to go? I have it. If you're not willing to say who you are, I can discover you using my schedule, which is also on Blackboard. Camilla and Gibran are going on Thursday, right? Camilla and Gibran, are you guys here? Oh, Camilla, you're ready to go? You don't need any help with your argument? You're going to argue in favor of opening the border to people. And remember, let's not worry about, screening of criminals. I mean, that could be an issue. Gibran, you may be wanting to talk about that. You can mention it briefly, but I wouldn't make that be all of your argument, please. Okay. Does anybody else need any help with coming up with their summary of what their opinion is? Hopefully, what we talked about today is relevant. You're going to think about, yes, there's an effect on domestic wages, in particular for those people on the low end of the elephant you know, the 80th, the 90th percentile people, they're not going to see a lot of benefits from this. They really just aren't. And it might sort of make you think, well, then it's not fair. We shouldn't do it. You do have to think about everyone, maybe what kind of benefits there are. I'll save this till Thursday. On Thursday, I think we can have a good debate about. There's a lot more benefits and dangers. You know, hopefully Gibran and Camila will do some research and will bring up some stuff that maybe we hadn't even thought of, and then it'll be good to discuss that then. But I don't have a quiz scheduled. I don't think we'll have a quiz until next week. Okay, so right now you just have the homework. Do your summary, but